So, everyone, a very warm welcome to another edition of the Fatigue Files podcast. And I'm delighted today to have with me Katherine Elizabeth Anker, who is a mind body coach. She has a research background in specifically around consciousness and integration of consciousness and embodied knowing, meaning making, language, that kind of thing. But she also has a much longer multidisciplinary background in a range of areas. And she had to begin to really see how this landed when her son got MECFS. And that really brought her into a very different kind of conversation with her own theoretical and disciplinary engagements. So today I'm really keen to explore with you, Katherine, what that journey was, what the kind of insights are that you're developing from this very close relationship with your son's process, and how that's informed your own work as a mind body coach, what it is you offer people. So a very warm welcome.
Thank you. Yeah. Actually, I myself am very sensitive, and that's also why I was working around consciousness and embodied consciousness, because I needed a vocabulary, and experience, and I needed to share with others this part of life and this part of my experience of life. And So that's sort of like what led me into the field and the way I approached it. Also with an education before my research background that was very embodied, very much about learning uh, different, musical things, but learning through integrating your body actively in the learning process. So that's kind of like my background. And then when my son came home, and I quickly realized he was so sick and he couldn't even sit up right, and he couldn't hardly walk. And I quickly realized that there wasn't so much help to get from our official health institutions, from the doctor, who didn't really understand also what was going on. And I had a friend who is very conscious and very well educated, who had ME/CFS also. She did teach me some things about this condition.
Mm,
So all of this together, I gradually moved into a deeper understanding of ME/CFS. And I have such a broad and a little bit unusual background. So I'm also a nutritional therapist, and so I studied also an anatomy and what now I'm lacking the English word, but anatomy, physiology, and learning of different diseases. So I also have this background, and in my PhD, I integrated also biological and biophysical elements, because that's how I could reach this kind of subtle body embodied intelligence that I was feeling inside myself, if that
brilliant.
makes sense.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
does. That's a really fantastic journey. It sounds like what you did was you, over time, you experientially and intellectually unfolded layers and layers that you ultimately found were kind of webbed relationalities of the self, and that there's a way of attuning very deeply to our embodied, vast, arguably more than human intelligence. And yet it's a radical homecoming, isn't it, to the depths and breadths of being a human being. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering, Katherine, if you could put in a nutshell, like if there is a way of distilling the heart of the insight that you've reached on this journey and watching your son's journey, what would that be like for people listening when they kind of go, well, what's the jewel here? What's my invitation here? What would you say to such a person?
I think it's about, as we've already mentioned, it's about the intelligence, the natural intelligence of the body, and that it sort of has needs. And I mean, I don't know if you can say will, but some kind of direction that is needed in life. And of course, it's to connect to the nature of our own bodies and realize that we don't know everything yet, and maybe ever. We don't know everything about how this body works and what its messages are, and which is the same with nature in general. And there's also a connection between the body and nature. And then it unfolded differently in me and in my son, because to me, I had to always tune into my body in order to just exist. And that was usually not that much in alignment with existing culture or the way that society worked also in workplaces and stuff. I had to always seek to balance my own system. And so from that, I can extract also that it's something about stress. It's something about authenticity also. It's something about non-authenticity evoking stress in the system and us being a little bit blind to it, or having blind spots, as we say in my country, blind, maybe blindfolds in a little bit of way, because we have been culturalized into not noticing, especially at the more subtle level, and taking
Mm.
seriously what the body is communicating, both through sensations and also through emotions, and gradually learn to not identify with them, but to see them, to listen to them, to understand that they are intensities in the body that are communicating what does the body need in order to make this energy intensity live and move inside of me and between me and others. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah, so
So,
yeah,
so what I'm hearing there is the key invitation is to a kind of profound self-attunement as an embodied being, and as profound attunement to somatic languages, we could call them, the way in which the body in multiple ways, I love that word you used, intensities, that there are like these pushings, pullings, clenchings and loosenings that are a highly intelligent and mobile language of the body. And it seems to me that what you're saying to people is the central invitation is to find practices and ways of being that allow you to tune into that without being overwhelmed by it, without identifying with any given intensity, but being a space for it. And that attunement is what allows a kind of relaxation in the communicative system itself, because the body starts to understand in multiple ways that it's heard, that it's held, that it's attended to. Am I hearing you right there?
absolutely, absolutely. And that's also the path in the healing journey. If you have ME/CFS, or if you're a human that has all whatever condition you have, because what I also found is that every inch of understanding, and I'm kind of like a nerd, I just dive into it and I just stay in it, and I'm still in it. And what I found is that it's not just about ME/CFS. I think it's so profoundly important to understand the mind body, what not only connection but integration, and in ME/CFS, but it's also for all other human beings who have gone down paths where there is some kind of forgetfulness about the importance of the body, which I tend to say is cultural. I also have a cultural science in my background also. So yeah, so
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, and I don't know if you'd agree with this, I kind of feel that MECFS and related complex chronic conditions are precisely because of a fundamental mismatch between the evolutionary intelligences of the body and the way that it evolved millennia before there was even a human neocortex to speak of, and how contemporary life worlds are structured in terms of things like junk light exposure, poor nutrition, bad sleep practices, and all the rest of it. And the body is a system or an assemblage of enormous complexity, a multitude of intelligences that are moving intelligently and have, as I think you've implied in a conversation we had before, even the cells have a kind of agency of their own. Like there is a kind of agentic quality that runs through all these things. And that sounds really complicated, but boils down to some very, very simple things, which is just aligning in very simple, basic, disciplined, cheap, inexpensive ways with this ancient intelligence, seeing sunlight early enough in the day, making sure there's true dark at night, making sure that you're not ingesting toxins and all that sort of stuff. And so it is, as you imply, a homecoming to what it means to be a human at all. It's far more than MECFS or long COVID. It's like the MECFS, we're kind of like canaries in the mine because we've got systems that have been sensitized, but there's no difference between us and an athlete ultimately in terms of what we need to do in order to flourish as a human being. So that we're just more sensitive, more limited. Our system's got a higher allostatic load, say. And so coming back into homeostasis, as you're implying, this is about what it means to be human. This is what it means to be a kind of human material body in a material world and to live in a way that is just sensible at the end of the day, grounded and realistic. So what have you discovered, you and your son together, on this journey about the practices central to his journey into healing? Because you've mentioned in another conversation how well he's doing. And that his self-attunement is a key element of that. So I'd love you to speak to that and how that informs your healing work.
Yeah, I can say shortly that without going too much into depth in his personal situation, that he used to be a ballet dancer already. He's very young, but he's already had a whole life almost, a whole career. So he used to be a ballet dancer, and then he became an actor and went to the state acting school. And so in the acting school, I mean, at the ballet, it's very strict and disciplinary, but in the acting school, it's a little bit more research into yourself as a human being in order to learn how to act different parts. And he also got into Eckhart Tolle, and slowly he went into Buddhism, Thich Nhat Hanh, and so he sort of and he went to a silent retreat also for 2 weeks in the mountains of Portugal. So that means that he was on a journey already when the system broke down totally. There were many small signs, but that's a different story. We could speak a long time on that. But then the total system broke down, and so he sort of he didn't understand it. We had to learn to understand ME, the ME condition, and also to get a little bit out of thinking that, it's a disease, you're ill, and also quickly getting out of the idea that you can never get well and all this. But then he has been listening to his innate body understanding, sort of that's just how he is. He changed the room. He changed the living room into like a healing space and put up many little calligraphies with these small stop running, or the be happy now, or the moment is now, life is now, and these many kinds of things. He also put up pictures of us when he was small with his brother, family pictures. And I noticed that because he rented a room at my sister's now, but before he moved, he removed those pictures also. And I find it like this intuitive journey of moving back into childhood. And something happened in that process. Then he moved to my sister's to feel that he lives by himself now, that he sort of moves away from home. But I think for a whole year, there's been lots of somatic practices through Plum Village app that has some really great somatic practices where you move into also the different organs, and you also end up thanking your different organs, even if you're in this illness or this, what do you call it, in this condition with these different symptoms. But he innately knew that he had to this thing about not fearing, not paying too much attention to the symptoms, sort of like, oh, this is happening. Oh, I'm feeling this right now. And then just being with it, that was innate in him.
Mm.
Uh, and then he has gradually moved towards small walks and small dancing sequences. Uh, yeah, I'm so that's kind of like where he's at. We also had to leave, like he was getting the IV treatments. We went to a private doctor. We did all these things like with loads of supplements, and so we've been through that, and he's not taking that many supplements anymore. It's like very reduced because the body just couldn't handle all that.
Mm.
So it's for him, it's a journey, and while he's been on his journey, I've been on mine, like really understanding or trying to understand and feeling into this situation with Emmy, which I see as a kind of severe stress. And I see many other different kinds of stress conditions. And that's what I work with clients with. So I tuned more into also the connection between understanding or small narratives, feeling, and the particular symptom.
Right. So
Yeah.
I'm struck there by a couple of things. One is your understanding around stress, which I'd like to explore a little more, um, because that could mean many, many different things. And the other is that thing that you just said, there's an element of self-narration that seems to be part of the way of attuning or managing a relationship with not just the symptoms, but also the body in which the symptoms are feedback. So perhaps we could start by, you said MECF as you see it as kind of a complex around stress. How do you imagine or construct stress in that matrix of connections?
Hmm. I see it as when some of the bodily systems, especially the nervous system, but also, of course, immune system, digestive system, circulatory system, move out of homeostasis, and that in a, let's say, a well-balanced body, your systems are able to move in and out of homeostasis in a more flexible way. But in life, when we also see it from an evolutionary perspective, there are new stressors in our virginity, like in society, as you said, the nourishment is not good enough. There's electromagnetic radiation, there is too much light from the screen, too much information. So it's all of our systems. It's also the mental capacity and the intellectual capacity. It's also the capacity for holding emotions, which many people are not trained in these days, because we don't really, I say we, but in society, we don't really find it so important. And also there's too much identification with emotions. So it's like instead of seeing it as, like I said, intensities moving through the body that do need to have their process,
Mm.
and teaching children and holding space for children to feel their true emotions and feelings and sensations. Many times they're able to, but there's not a language, there's not like this small society around them. Nobody talks about it. Nobody really listens, maybe. So it sort of like gets
Mm.
down into the subconscious again. Um, and so stress is sort of like when we get non-attuned anymore with what's really moving, so that the body can bounce back into balance. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So what I'm hearing, and you must tell me if I've got this wrong, there is a sense of misalignment, but it seems to be operating at many, many different levels, including just in terms of material connection with toxins or whatever. And the key there in what I'm hearing you say is there's a loss of flexibility. There's a kind of rigidity, a brittleness, which we know associates to things like overwhelm. Because obviously, if we're flexible and capacious, we don't get overwhelmed. We merely expand to make space for, and we're able to be flexible. So I'm hearing you say there that stressors come into play most perniciously in relation to something like ME/CFS when the overall system at any level, mentally, emotionally, physically, loses its capacity for responsive flexibility and adaptation and kind of gets stuck in patterns of rigidity. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, that's a big part of it. I think this is my philosophy. This is not, factual, but I think there's also an element of subtle consciousness that needs to integrate into the body, and also that we don't, I'm generalizing, but that there isn't a space where this can become natural for a person, so that if it gets blocked through living your life in a particular way, you don't get to integrate the next level of consciousness, because to me, consciousness is also what it's in the body. It's what the body sort of
It's what the body
develops.
is, right?
Yeah,
It's what the body
what the
is.
body is. So it's not intellectual,
Yeah.
but it wants to integrate. So it's both the bouncing in and out, while reacting to stressors and integrating. Okay, there is this stressor. There's this stressor in my life. How can the overall system live with these stressors in a unique way? But how can it also integrate whatever wants to integrate of consciousness of life in a way?
Mm.
Because I see a close connection between life and consciousness.
Yeah. I mean, I think there that that's a kind of invitation into expansion and depth, isn't it? It's a
Yeah,
kind of invitation to be more aware of the kind of weird, wonderful miracle of what's emerging as ourselves, and
absolutely.
ourselves in relationship to other selves, which is always a really interesting invitation. So you mentioned as well this kind of idea of storytelling, self storytelling about what's going on. Um, where does that fit? And in terms of your own healing practice, how do you work? How do you work with that? And how do you encourage clients into a greater sense of their own flexibility, their own capacity for that kind of responsive agency of a healthy system?
Many times it's connected also to getting to know a little bit better your own stress reactions, and then I can use the polyvagal approach, like if you're in fight, flight, or if you're in freeze, or if you're in rest and digest, usually your thought patterns change,
Mm-hmm.
and we all have experience with this. Maybe we don't notice in everyday life, but also if you are stressed and you are maybe disappointed, you emotionally, and your thoughts are starting to produce and reproduce around this feeling, and maybe in relation to a particular person. And then when you sort of like you have the resolve this anger intensity, your little narratives around this person change. And so to get a little bit more acquainted with these reactions, and also to make them see it a little bit more objectively. So it's not really my identity. I'm not locked in hatred towards a particular person, but it's something that just comes up, and to recognize which kind of narratives that come up. And when it comes to symptoms, it would be a same kind of process. So it's both that you can recognize which stage you're in. Also, if you're like in overall freeze state, and it's a lot of your day, or it takes a lot of space in your life to be in a freeze state, then what kind of thoughts, what maybe you are not that you don't have so much agency, maybe you don't have so much motivation, So to recognize these conditions in yourself is one part of it. And then also it's around symptoms. Then we have to move into a more intuitive way. And I know you talk about self-hypnosis, and I'm not trained in that, but I know that we sort of shift the kind of dialogue. I speak slower, we move, like in the somatic practices also, so that it can, sometimes it just comes up. I encourage to find different words for your symptoms, for instance, in the experience of them. And that's also how language can play a role without this main work being intellectual. And
Mm.
I have to say a little thing also, because in my PhD I worked with people in art tech science, and most of them were artists. And that was because that was a space that allowed me to explore consciousness with methods that were not primarily from natural science and measuring everything. And so this whole aesthetic, not as in beauty, but like in a different kind of logic that is not logic. This approach I find is very valuable in this kind of work, and also in a way in understanding MECFS. Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
it does. It does because I think, I mean, again, what we're talking about here is kind of material patterns of being and becoming. Language isn't, people think of language as just words, right? And you and I know that that's not the case. Language itself is deeply physiological. You know, I have to breathe, it comes from my throat, it comes from my chest, it's affected by the level of tension in my system. And it's one way of my system explaining to others or myself what it is I'm experiencing. But language also has material implications, words shape perception. And like you were saying there, you know, you might find a different word for your symptoms. For example, we might even not call them symptoms. We might just call them feedback or speech or wisdom or insight. Any word we use has a whole set of associated framings, which actually then, at the level of meaning, change our experience, our lived experience of what we're actually dealing with. And I think that's incredibly interesting because obviously, as you point out, I'm into hypnosis, and hypnosis uses language extensively, but not just language, but language as a kind of material effect. As you demonstrated, if I change my vocal prosody and my tone now, it's going to have a completely different effect on your nervous system, right? So, and this is really kind of impactful, effective stuff. It's not intellect. And I think a lot of people think of language as something we perform intellectually from the brain, whereas actually what we're talking about, what your view of language, my view of language, is infinitely richer than that. And it's kind of meaning making practices that use linguistic forms. And it's very broad in that sense.
Absolutely. And I find it very, very important, but also challenging to communicate, and not in sessions. I mean, it's good in sessions, but I also have a wish to communicate broader on both MECFS and the whole concept of stress and homeostasis and connecting to our nature. And that may sound like I'm not into the love and light spirituality kind of way of thinking, but actually, I've been very, what can you say? It was part of my research also, and part of the work that I did those years was also, it had a concept of nature also, and on all this evolutionary perspective also. So um, yeah, it's not just like fluffy, but I think it's very important. And I also work with metaphors in my PhD, and the way that metaphors are formed from our physical experience. Like we've talked about that also before with Lakoff and Johnson, which is also a contribution, I think, to this field. So I'd like to see this field uh, um, not only explored but developed, actually, to see it developing and beyond the natural medical sciences, and it's not because I don't, I want to condescend or anything around medical doctors or these old disciplines, but in my research, I also work with a transdisciplinary paradigm, not only methodologically, but paradigmatic. And I think it's very important to build bridges between these different kinds of disciplines. And that's also what some of these chronic conditions are showing us that we need to do to help, help, assist, make a space for people who go through this as part of their development. I also learned very much to have so much respect for this kind of path, since it's not been my personal experience to be ill so far as part of my developmental journey, but I can see it so clearly in my son, how much this develops. How developing it is, and how in a way amazing it also is to consult your be able to consult your own body's intelligence and letting it lead, even for him by intuition, but nobody taught him that.
Yeah. I mean, I, as someone who had it for 32 years, I wholeheartedly endorse what you're saying. I mean, I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but if you do have it and if you can respond to it invitationally and really take that invitation, I mean, it is profoundly transformative. And when we talk about intuition, what are we talking about? We're talking about the kind of ability to sense into non-cognitive forms of signaling and knowing, whether that's from our own fleshy embodiment or whether it's from the world we're moving through or someone else's fleshy embodiment. We're picking up non-cognitively in a more than conscious way signals that the cognitive mind can't quickly process because it's narrow. And I love what you said about the need for transdisciplinary thinking, which, for non-academics, you're probably aware that academic disciplines tend to exist in their own reality tunnels, their own silos, and they're like different lenses through which people look, and they accrete over time. They get layers and layers of sedimentation where the views within them can get quite locked into orthodoxies. And sometimes there are struggles within the discipline about what the orthodoxy is. And actually, that's healthy academic, kind of tension. We need that rub. But in the West, we have typically tended to categorize and fragmentize reality, and we see it in medicine with specialities in different areas of the body as if it's not one complex whole. And so transdisciplinary thinking in academia that trespasses across these categorizations is a really, really important development in academia, because there is no one way of looking. There's no one reality tunnel that is necessarily better than others. There are just better contingent explanations for now. And this emphasis that we've got here on kind of like being faithful to what the body's doing, the way in which the system is acting, communicating, is kind of getting at the idea that if you've got a really good idea of what's really here and you see its complexity, you're going to be more faithful to what it needs than if you have a simplistic, narrow explanation that is simple to understand but doesn't do the system justice. And that's where you get all sorts of forms of injustice that emerge from, okay, it's psychosomatic, it's all in your head, you're doing it, bad luck you. You end up with these very unjust outcomes when we think too simplistically, which is different from having the beauty of simplicity that embraces complexity but cuts through it with a kind of wisdom. And I think, Katherine, that's what we're saying. We want to see the complexity, but that complexity itself points to some fundamentally simple ways of being that are as ancient as evolutionary biology itself. The oldest language in the body is the language of light, and so cells respond to light and dark.
Absolutely.
And if we stop thinking about ourselves as cellular beings and we forget that, then we think it's just woo when we talk about light and dark, or it's a kind of brute biological thing. Whereas in fact, it's a system of great intimacy and intelligence, but boils down to some very simple practices. So I'm loving this, Katherine. I'm loving your emphasis on transdisciplinarity. I think that's really, really important. And what we're really saying here, folks, is there's more than one way to see this stuff. And we shouldn't buy into the latest meme or the latest trend in this field, because it's always evolving. And every closure that we make, every kind of, oh, it's this, it's definitely this, shuts out the experience of other people who don't fit that paradigm. And they experience that as suffering, which I would see as a form of injustice.
Yeah, what I think is very important is to make spaces for people who are going through this process, and to meet them in a kind of space that is adequate, not adequate, that is relevant for people who go through these processes, spaces of love and trust in a way, but also with knowledge, and but also in the broad sense of the stress which I mentioned before. It's also for our future generations, and for all our children. I mean, in my country, there is a huge increase in both children and young adults who are really suffering, or in all kinds of ways, very that are very distressed. And it's not only about ME, it's also about multiple other conditions, and something like anxiety and depression. That's also a kind of stress. That's also a way that the system communicates stress to us. So I think so that's why it's also so much broader than for only ME. But I do think that there's a lot to learn from these experiences that people are sharing with ME. And I genuinely believe also in making this process much easier, much more bearable, let's say that, for people who are in that process and who are experiencing these symptoms. And that's also what my son, many times he said to me, because he knows that I'm studying, I'm researching, I'm connecting, I'm networking, and he said, "But you're not the one who's going to have PEM, You're not the one who's going to feel this in your body." Of course, when he's my son and I'm this sensitive, there's a lot of empathy also at this body intelligence level that I don't feel the whole thing, of course, but I feel so much into it anyway. And I feel like I'm learning also at the embodied level, I'm learning about this. Yeah.
That's really beautiful. I mean, that's a wonderful form of maternal love, and just simply being present to him from your embodied knowing, from your self knowing, and the sense of connection you have to him. I mean, it's wonderful to come across someone who's got such inordinate compassion and ability to attune to someone else's suffering. Because so often what people with ME/CFS experience is that the people in their lives can't get it, and that's not a judgment on people, right? They can't get it because they haven't experienced it, but they don't necessarily have that capacity to hold space for it. They struggle, they might get impatient, they might make judgments. They themselves might suffer too because they're grieving the loss of, I think this often gets overlooked between partners, because you hear people saying, oh, my partner's quite demanding, but I think sometimes we don't stop and think about that partner, what they've lost, what they're going through.
That's the whole thing. That's
It
what
is.
I could have needed. I'm now networking more, but it's not that easy to find another parent with the same kind of situation and same kind of openness to recovery and mind-body approach to the whole thing. But I want to say a little thing about this, me feeling into him, because it's not only, that's not all he needs. And that's just a good perspective also for people who don't maybe have that, because I think because he moved to my sister and she doesn't have that kind of, I mean, she's a different kind of person, a much more materialist, much more basic. But I do think that although it's been hard for myself emotionally, I do think that this kind of simple materiality in everyday life without the depth of the emotional connection with your mother, in his case, also is helpful. It's
Totally,
helpful to make
especially,
everything basic,
yep,
but safe.
yes, absolutely. And there comes a point with our children when they have to mature into a very different relationship with us. And we mothers, we mothers have to allow and facilitate that. And it's a really interesting transition, isn't it? That
Yeah,
child adulting.
I know, but what I wanted to emphasize with it is this deep understanding, or like my sensing deeply into his process, or my researching into ME/CFS. It is not something that I ever need to impose on him. You know,
Yeah, totally.
it's very important that this only is space holding. So
Yes,
I can use my competencies with other people if they want it, if they need it, if they want to pay for it and move into this kind of relation. But it's very important to not impose because he needs to have his own process.
yes,
And
absolutely.
the space with my sister, which is more basic and material, there is no one who understands. But she also, it's not like she discards his situation. She takes it seriously, so she does believe in it. I
Mm,
know that many people with ME/CFS, they're not believed for a long while. And that was the case also with the friend that I had for many years with this condition. It took her many years to even find out that this condition could be the ME condition, and also a long time for any kind of help or understanding from the outside world.
yes,
Even me, it was difficult for me to understand. For instance, if we had an agreement, we go somewhere. We're like five people. We're going to this interesting talk. This must be just for you. And then we go there, and she doesn't appear. She doesn't come, and I'm disappointed, you know? And she didn't explain to me. So I understand also the impact it can have on relations. I can even feel it with my son because he can't, he's brilliant in keeping up the relation, I think, but it's also difficult when you're in
definitely
that.
is. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
definitely challenging. And I know for myself when I was ill, I got into the habit of saying to people, I'm notoriously unreliable. It's not because I don't want to be there, it's because on the day I might not have the capacity. But
yeah,
even sometimes people will explain that to their friends or their family. And then, you know, I think it was Hart said humans have limited altruism. There's that
yeah,
sense of, yeah, you can understand, but you can still feel pissed off in a
yeah,
situation. And that, I guess that's the same for all relationships. It's just that with MECFS, you've got that fundamental fact that someone's capacity is moving underneath them in a way they
mm,
can't predict and they certainly can't always control. And
yeah,
sometimes it's really simple. I remember years and years ago, my mum, bless her, coming to visit me. And I lasted 20 minutes before I had to say, I'm really sorry, mum, I have to go to bed. And that felt bad for me. And I'm sure it felt bad for her. And, I hear this from clients a lot about the relational challenges of navigating this. But what I think is so beautiful about what you've described is I think your son, in a way, has the best of both worlds because there's a kind of boundedness with him being with your sister. He's grounded and he's in this space where there's no great focus on it. But at the same time, he's got a mother who gets it as best as any human could get it, who isn't going through it. You get it, you're there, and you hold space for him in that sense. And so I think that's beautiful because it's very invitational on both. It's a lovely in breath, out breath situation for him that is fundamentally healthy. It's lovely.
but I want to tell you that in this whole period, because there's the whole mother theme, and I'm not going to go much into it, but there is hurt emotions and everything involved in a situation where first he lives with me for 10 months and then he moves, and I'm worried, about his condition and them not knowing about the condition and knowing more and more about how to get better, and he doesn't want to listen and all of this. But I just want to say that what I do with clients, I do with myself. I have to process emotions for this to work. So in this relational thing, but also, of course, he's so close to my heart that if I don't see him for a longer while, it hurts. It really hurts. And so I have to process these emotions also to when I see him, so that they're not too,
Yeah.
it's not about that too much.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to say to people also going through these things relationally with, because the person, there should be more knowing out there about the caretaker or the relative, the person who loves the person with ME. And there are hurt feelings, no matter if you're ill or not. There are hurt feelings, but so there people who are relatives also need to work with themselves can work with themselves with the same kind of methods that are used for healing in general.
Yeah. Again, that's a lovely invitation, isn't it, into maturation, expansion, and evolution as
Yeah.
human beings, and kind of to recognize this relationality that runs all the way up and down again, all the way down to cellular complexes, all the way up into all sorts of embodied actions, and all the way into our human relations. And then beyond that, into social and cultural constructs. I mean, it's the relationality, that the qualities of that, and the need to understand that and to see, the whole assemblage of, people at home with each other. The non-ill partner is as involved in that assemblage as the ill partner, and there has to be, I think, it would be useful if in our community people had more understanding for some of the partners or the family of those who have ME/CFS, because I hear quite a lot of natural frustration from people with the illness. Totally natural. I'm not judging it. I absolutely get it. I've been there myself. But I think this context of relational care that embraces everybody in that matrix is so important.
I think that's a good way that when I mean, to end this, not that I want this to end, but
No,
to end it
we are on
about,
time, so
yeah,
that's good.
I know, but I think that's for one. Now I also have systems thinking as my education, and so to see the whole family and relational thing as a system, like a family system, and the whole family system is affected by ME/CFS. So I think consciousness about it can help a lot to just understand what's going on, and that everyone is kind of like part in it, and how are you in the best possible way a part of this. But also I'm thinking one thing that could have been so good, which happens on Facebook and in Raylan's group, is community. And I don't have the answer, so that would be an open question. How can you make community for people who are in the midst of the ME/CFS process? Because it's so lonely, but also there's not so much energy to socialize. If there were, then you would have your social network still.
Yes. Yeah,
Um,
that's a challenging one, isn't it? Especially if you're severe
yeah,
and you're at the stage where, you're really bedbound, not coping with light, sound, and any relational effort is too much. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt. I mean, it's not, as we said, this is a complex thing, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. That said, there are so many different invitations that it's issuing for really awakening to dimensions of our shared lives as human beings that we've neglected for a very long time as a culture, and that we're being invited back into through,
exactly.
not just through this, as you say, chronicities of all kinds, chronic anxieties. It's all signs of a fundamental mismatch, a loss of resilience, a loss of capaciousness, a loss of connection, um, as natural, thoroughly natural embodied beings. And there's just so much richness in there for us to explore
I
together.
think so.
Hey?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Just short, but because shortly, I think also my experience in my network, you can call, of acquaintances and friends and stuff, uh, more could have been done. And I know, that's also a whole thing about I'm into compassion. And I think that something like just sending, you could, for instance, that's an idea, just send a small SMS here and now, a loving message, a message of hope, or whatever, however you would frame it, to the person. If you know there's such person in your network, why not? It wouldn't take that much. I think compassion does not take a lot. Just a skill.
Yeah, I think that's a really good invitation. So, people, we're going to end here with that beautiful invitation to perhaps think of someone, one or two, or just one person you know who's struggling with this. Even if you yourself are in this journey, but you know of someone else who is, to send one simple, encouraging, nurturing text. A lovely practical suggestion, Catherine. Thank you so much for this conversation. I'm going to stop recording it, but I'll come back and say goodbye to you properly in a moment. So thank you so much on behalf of everyone listening.